Hey there, Ryan Reynolds here. It's a new year, and you know what that means. No, not the diet. Resolutions. A way for us all to try and do a little bit better than we did last year. And my resolution, unlike big wireless, is to not be a raging and raise the price of wireless on you every chance I get. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
Today on CityCast Denver, construction of new apartment buildings has been booming these past couple years. Yet Denver rents are only going down a tiny bit, or staying flat, depending on who you ask. So today I'm asking the guy your landlord asks for help explaining this kind of supply and demand mystery. Drew Hamrick is the chief advocate for landlords at the state capitol and a pretty good analyst of the market from the landlord's perspective. I was eager to talk to him about why landlords aren't dropping rents faster, why he thinks rents could skyrocket next year, and why local landlords love their rent-setting algorithms, even though the White House has now said they're unfair. Today is Monday, January 6th. I'm Paul Caroli, and here's what Denver's talking about. Drew Hamrick, welcome to CityCast Denver.
Hey, thanks for having us.
So I feel like we need to start by just explaining who you are, who you represent, because I think there are a lot of people out there that don't even realize that your job exists. Can you explain who you are and what you do?
So I work for the Colorado Apartment Association. That's a trade association for rental property providers. Basically, they're the owners and operators of existing rental properties.
AKA landlords.
Landlords.
Which is great, because I really want to know what landlords are thinking. So let's get into it. Let's talk about rent. That's where I want to start. Just big picture, we got an interesting new trend here. It seems like rent is going down. I have some new data from CoStar across the Denver metro area. It says the average rent for a single bedroom apartment in Metro Denver is going down $16 per month. Does that sound right?
Yes, it does sound right. What we've tracked, and we've put out a rent and vacancy report for 30 years now, and it's a pretty important document because it's what investors use when they're determining how much to spend on an apartment complex. Mm-hmm. Basically, the value of an apartment complex is a multiple of the rent that they generate. So it becomes extremely important to an investor to figure out exactly what rent's being charged and exactly how many of those units are sitting idle. In the last 12-month period that we've tracked, which is through the third quarter of last year, basically September, showed that rents had grown only 1.2% over the previous 12 months and less than 1% over the year before that. So extremely flat rental rates over the last 2 years. And I know that will surprise a lot of your listeners too, because you're just always hearing people talking about catastrophic levels of rent increases, and that really hasn't been the case in at least the metro area for some time now. We haven't tracked figures like your source has over the last month, but I've heard a lot of rumblings that October and November saw some pretty steep declines. So it does not surprise me at all that there's actually been a decrease in rent over that fairly short period of time.
Which is surprising to me because, I mean, anecdotally, you look around the city, you see cranes. I've seen data that says the last 2 years of construction has been like a record-breaking pace of apartment units being built, like 30,000 units in 2 years. We normally see like 5 to 10,000 per year. So what is happening? Why are rents like stable or going down when we see the supply increasing so rapidly?
No, you're absolutely right on all accounts. We've had historic numbers of new units coming onto the market. And rent, like every other commodity, is supply and demand. If you build enough units to keep up with demand, rent stays flat. If you build more than enough units, the rent goes down. And this massive number of units coming onto market is exactly what's been responsible for flat rents for the last 2 years, and now, at least in the short-term level, some decreasing levels. The problem with it is changes in supply happen slowly. From somebody deciding, yeah, I'm going to invest in a new apartment community, and it being built and being occupied is a 4-ish year project. And that's a problem.
Do you say 4-year project?
Exactly. And there's a lot that local governments do to slow that down. And that's a problem. And the reason that's a problem is because demand changes relatively quickly. So if you have a situation where all of a sudden there's a spike in the number of people wanting a rental property, and it takes you 4 years to react to that, then you're going to have situations where you get price spikes because supply is not keeping up with demand. The knee-jerk reaction for a lot of folks when they see one of those price spikes is to make the wrong choices and start doing things that actually deter future development. And that's where this can get kind of circular and spin out of control. And, across the country, a lot of local governments are doing a lot of things to discourage housing production.
Okay, so I'm trying to interpret this in my mind, how I think our listeners are probably hearing this. You're talking about things that would discourage housing production, and I'm thinking that probably means regulations for making buildings more climate friendly. I know that's been an issue here recently. There was a lawsuit about greener buildings, and for I guess developers or investors, as you're saying, that would mean it would cost more to build. Am I on the right track there?
You absolutely are, but there's a host of issues. And, every developmental requirement has some good. The trick is always balancing, is the good that you're achieving worth the cost burden that you're putting on the market? And all of these things in summation add up into fewer units being built. One of the biggest ones out there is just plain old single-family zoning. The vast majority of the county of Denver is zoned so that the only thing you can build in it is a single-family home. There's some benefit to that, particularly if you're a single-family homeowner in that neighborhood. But it has the net result of preventing the city from densifying as much as it otherwise would based on free market forces.
Yeah, and for the people that you work with who might be looking at that land and thinking, oh boy, all that single family zoning, that might be a great place to build a big apartment complex.
Absolutely. I mean, to an apartment developer, everything you see looks like a good place to stick an apartment building. And that makes perfect sense. And I'm not here to advocate that, we be short-sighted with that. But I certainly think we're to the point, given the shortage of property, the expense of buying and renting property, the economic friendliness of multi-unit living, that all those things make multifamily housing the solution to our problems. And in places where we can only have one house, we start by saying, well, maybe a duplex works here. In places where a duplex, maybe a fourplex works. And, this townhome concept of small communities, 6 units linked together, is a really elegant solution to urban living, and I think one that our policymakers should allow developers to pursue more.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I get why you see that making sense, but I also know that can be controversial too. I mean, some people don't like the way those things look, and character of the neighborhoods. All these things lead to this is such a fraught topic. This whole topic, it makes me curious about how the people you work with, the landlords have responded to this last 2 years where it feels like all these issues that we're talking about have gotten so loaded. I feel like, maybe it's a journalist thing. I see this, but I hear people talking about junk fees more. I hear people talking about tenant unions. I mean, it just feels like this is much hotter lately, this whole renter-landlord relationship. How does that feel from your perspective, the people you work with? How are you all talking about that?
I agree 100%. I think Colorado has become the tip of the spear for these issues from a national level, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And I also think housing, and rental housing in particular, has become the tip of the spear for kind of the anti-free market movement. There's just a contempt for property rights out there that applies to everything, but it seems to be easy to put those debates in the frame of a landlord-tenant relationship.
Well, yeah. I mean, you say contempt for property rights. I'm hearing people in my life who are like, rent is too damn high. Right. That's the other side of it. And you got to be sympathetic to that too. The rent is very high. A lot of people I know have been priced out of the city.
True, but it's all relative. I mean, right now, the ratio of what it costs to rent versus what the cost is to own is at a historical low. So on the one hand, renting compared to buying is at an all-time best deal. So viewed in those lights, rent's a good deal. When I'm telling you rent's only going up 1% the year before and 1.2% last year. Compare that to the smaller bag of potato chips that you're buying. We're living in an environment where in some sectors of the economy, there's been 10, 15, 20% inflation. And so housing prices are performing, or not prices for purchase, but for renting, have been growing at a much, much more reasonable rate than that. But for somebody that has been here for a few decades, and you think what $450 in rent used to get you compared to what $1,900 in rent, which is about median rent in the metro area, that does seem very high.
Interesting.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit Shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
Oh, it's such a clutch off-season pickup, Dave.
I was worried we'd bring back the same team.
I meant those blackout motorized shades.
Blinds.com made it crazy affordable to replace our old blinds.
Hard to install?
No, it's easy. I installed these and then got some for my mom. She talked to a design consultant for free and scheduled a professional measure and install.
Hall of Fame son.
They're the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings in the world.
Blinds.com is the GOAT.
Shop Blinds.com right now and get up to 40% off select styles. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Give me a projection. You're talking to landlords, your clients, the people you work with. What does the future hold for rent in Denver? Is it going to keep steady? Is it going to go down? Is it going to go up?
I expect rent to remain flat and maybe drop a little bit over the short term as we continue to experience the effects of this historically large amount of new units that have been dropped on the market. But that process has stopped. It stopped more dramatically in counties like Denver than some of the suburban counties. But over the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to see far fewer units brought to bear. And that will gradually cause rents to start creeping up again.
What happened?
Well, a lot of things were done by local governments to put the brakes on new development. In Denver, the most, I think, intellectually interesting one is what they wrongfully call the Affordable Housing Ordinance.
Yes, I thought we might talk about this.
What the city said is there's 2 different geographic areas, kind of what they call the high-cost market, which is pretty much downtown, Cherry Creek, Golden Triangle, the places you'd imagine, and then everywhere else. And there's different percentages that apply in the different areas. But for a multifamily complex of more than 10 units, if you build one, you have to take 12% of those units and rent them out for 40% less than market so that someone on the lower level of the income scale can afford to live there. So it has the net effect of making the revenue you'd make on that project about 4% lower than it otherwise would be. So nobody can afford to build anything with that requirement in place. Deals that penciled out before it was enacted don't pencil out anymore.
Are you hearing that from specific people? They're saying, I'm not building in Denver because of this added cost.
Oh, absolutely. And the statistics bear that out. We've tracked the applications for permits for new multifamily construction, and they dropped off by 87% during the quarter after the enactment of the ordinance versus the quarter before. Now, I get that some of that is people running up and trying to beat the effectiveness of the ordinance, so there was some artificially high building beforehand. And I also get that at about the same period of time, we're talking June 2022, there was a dramatic spike in interest rates, and higher interest rates are always the enemy of development. So there's some other things going on here. But those very, very low depressed levels have continued on to this day. And in the 7 counties that surround Denver, they've actually seen a little bit of growth, modest growth, compared to what was going on before June. So it's very obvious to me that the difference is people have stopped building in Denver. Now, I know you don't see that with your eyeballs because there's cranes out there, but those cranes are the projects from 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and 4 years ago.
Interesting.
And
well, it's more than just my eyeballs. I checked in with one of the architects of this affordable housing ordinance that you talked about, former Councilwoman Robin Kniech. She's doing some research on this, and she supplied me with some data. And it shows that if you stretch your field of vision from beyond just that quarter before and quarter after, where you're talking about that 87% drop, which she wouldn't dispute, but if you look at the annual number of permits in 2022, 2023, she says there's an average of 228 permits filed, and that's after the ordinance. Before the ordinance, you look at 2019, 211 permits. So it's really not that big of a difference in these annual filings. And I think she would say it's a little too soon to be looking at this impact. What would you say to that?
Well, Robin Kniech was the architect of this plan and the major advocate of it. And I get that she's defensive about the financial harm that it's caused. And we could get to a place that no one ever builds another home in Denver forever. And I doubt that it'll change her viewpoint that this was a good and valid idea to run. I also agree that the further you stretch out the effect, the less effect will be there, because these units that aren't getting built now, that doesn't mean they'll never get built. They will get built again, but only after everybody's rent is artificially increased by the 4.2% revenue loss that they mandated into the development. So my best guess is that takes 4 or 5 years, and these projects start to pencil in again. And if you're one of the lucky people that makes 60% of average area median income, you will qualify to get a unit that's 40% below market. But all your neighbors, the other, 88% of the residents in the building will all be paying 4.2% more rent to subsidize yours. So it's almost like a privatized welfare system. Now, depending upon how you feel about, how progressive our economy should be, you may think that's a great idea. It also may turn on whether you were one of those people that will be paying 5% more rent so somebody else can have 40% less rent. But what it's had the effect of is, for the medium term, stopping construction of multifamily.
Interesting. Let's turn to another hot button issue here. This is really why I wanted to talk to you today, is because over the holiday break, the White House's Council of Economic Advisors, so this is President Biden, the voice of the president, has come and turned to Denver with this new report on rent-setting algorithms. Very controversial topic in the last couple of years. They have done this report. They say a company called RealPage, which offers an algorithm to help landlords set rents, is leading to higher rents. And they say specifically tenants in Metro Denver paid the second highest extra cost each month as a result of RealPage's algorithm of any of the 20 cities they considered in this report, $136 more on average as a result of these rent-setting algorithms. These are your clients. These are people you work with. Help me understand why these things are so popular for landlords. Like, how do they work?
Well, let's start off with some things that I think a reasonable person would agree with in the White House report. I don't want to give the impression that that causes them to reach the right conclusion, because it absolutely does not. But there are some reasonable premises within the report, and that's part of what makes it deceptively seductive in its logic, because you'll see things that you'll shake your heads and say, oh, that makes sense to me. And in general, I do believe that the profitability of a rental housing provider that uses an algorithmic pricing model is probably about 4% greater than someone that doesn't.
So it sounds like you agree with the general conclusion here. What do you not agree with?
Not agree with it because the profitability doesn't come from higher rent rates than the market will bear. The profitability comes from not leaving your rental unit on the market as long while you chase a price that's too high. So you're 4% more profitable because your vacancy rate's lower, you're housing more people with fewer units. You can't charge more than the market will bear. If you're charging too much for your rental unit, your customer will just say, no, thank you, I'll rent somewhere else. Landlords don't set rental prices.
Sure they do.
No, they don't. The market does. Housing is a game of musical chairs. We have a certain amount of housing in the Denver metro area, and because it's a beautiful place and a wonderful place to live with lots of job opportunities and reasons for it to be desirable to be here, consumers come and want to take one of those chairs. When there's not enough chairs, they start bidding on those chairs, and the person with the lowest threshold of monetary pain ends up winning the chair by bidding the prices up. Rent prices are nothing more than what consumers bid them up to. I couldn't buy an apartment complex where right now the market rate rents are $1,900 and just say, you know what, I'd like to be richer than I am, so I'm going to charge $2,100 a month in rent. People wouldn't rent there. They'd go somewhere else. So,
well, but that's what gets us to the problem with this RealPage thing, is because the way this software works is all the landlords who use it, they pay for the subscription, and then they feed all their data about how much rent they're charging for rent into the algorithm, and then all the other landlords who pay for it, they get access to that data.
You're absolutely right on that point. In order to have collusion in pricing, you've got to have one, communication between competitors. Two, those competitors have to be large enough that they can impact the market.
Well, it seems like number one we've got. And then number two, from this White House report, it found that more than 45% of Metro Denver's rental properties use RealPage's software. So that seems like a pretty big chunk of the market.
I agree with both those points.
So let's get to number three.
They're communicating about historic prices. What the price was yesterday, this morning, 5 minutes ago. They're measuring the market. They're not communicating about what the price tomorrow will be. And keep something in mind about rental pricing. Most of the information about what people are paying for in rent is not public information. If you're trying to figure out how much your house is worth, you can go down to the clerk and recorder's office and find a similar house and see what it sold for a month ago, a year ago, whatever. You do that based on comps. All you, as either a competing landlord or as a customer out there trying to figure out what rent rate should be, can see about rent rates is what the advertised asking price is. And an ask price is always higher than the consumer's office price, the bid price, and the strike price is always somewhere in between.
I think I'm losing you a little bit. You're saying the advertised price of rent for an apartment is always higher than what people end up paying?
The process of people negotiating for a good, doesn't matter what it is. I want to buy your truck. Is you telling me what price you'd like, me telling you what price I would offer, and us meeting somewhere in the middle with a strike price. So if all somebody sees is my offer, they're going to think trucks are worth less than they are. If all somebody sees is your ask, they're going to think trucks are worth more than they are. It's the strike price that's the market price. And there's no way to see that. I can go to the internet and I can see what one of the major landlords is asking for a 3-bedroom apartment located in, X place and make a judgment based on that. But I have no idea what the consumer's offering, and I have no idea what they ultimately agreed to and say their 12-month release. That's not recorded anywhere for the public to see.
This is interesting what you're telling me. I understand what you're telling me, but I also know from my own personal experience and what I've heard from others that the opposite feels true to renters. And maybe it's not practically true, but it feels true because the advertised price, and this is a separate issue we're getting into, but the advertised price is like the price that you see that lures you in, and then you got all the fees on top of it. And then you end up paying like $200, $300 more than what you thought you were going to be paying for rent. And the everyday person, I don't think they're doing these negotiations with landlords. I think they're trying to find a place.
Well, in Colorado, you can't charge someone a fee unless they agree to it in writing. So this concept of surprise fees is a little bit of a misnomer because it's spelled out right there in the contract that you sign. But I certainly agree that if you're talking to someone in generalities and they're saying, yeah, the rent's about $1,200, and you come in and then for the first time you hear there's another $250 in assorted fees tacked onto that, and you've got your couch in a moving van because you'd relied on the price you thought. That's a problem. But that's not what goes on in our industry. Fees actually provide a great deal of transparency because rather than everything just being baked into the rent, you can actually, as a consumer, see what you're paying for, and in some cases opt out. Not in every case, but in a lot of cases. A lot of fees apply to things that, I mean, just imagine you had a 200-unit complex. Some of them had enclosed garages, some of them didn't. You might have the rent the same for those units, but have an enclosed garage fee.
Sure. Maybe you want the space, maybe you don't.
Yeah, exactly.
This is really interesting to hear because, like I said, in my personal experience, I never thought about it this way. But to know that this is how landlords are thinking about these fees is like transparency, that's fascinating to me.
Well, and in some cases, it allows the landlord to deliver services they wouldn't otherwise be able to deliver. I'll give you a perfect example. Over, say, the last 5-ish years, landlords have been put in a position where they've gone from a package showing up in their office every once in a while and them sticking it over in the corner and waiting for, Sally in Unit A to come in and say, hey, did you get my package? To have been converted into a warehouse for Amazon.com. Now, faced with that, most leases at that time just said, hey, we aren't your package delivery service. We can refuse packages. So as a resident, you could be forced with the situation of saying, well, I can buy stuff from Amazon, but I need to figure out how to send it to work or send it to my mom or send it wherever. Or you can figure out a solution to that. And the solution that is kind of, I think, impressive is there's vendors out there that sell lockers and codes. They don't sell them, they rent them. And they'll say, okay, we'll come in and install these lockers. We'll come up with this high-tech administrative model for notifying your residents when they get a package and what locker and what code to use to get it. But we're only going to do that if you charge the resident $7.50 a month for the service. So a person can opt in or opt out of that service. If I were living in one of these units, I'd probably opt in so I could get my, shampoo from Amazon. Right. But somebody may choose not. They might have a better option.
Interesting.
But that's the kind of flexibility that fees give that just rental amounts don't.
Interesting. All right, let's get back to the RealPage stuff because again, this is like the hottest topic I think in this world right now. You talked about the collusion allegation. It's not just the White House that's making this allegation. Our Attorney General and now gubernatorial candidate Phil Weiser, he joined a national lawsuit, and at the legislature last year, some lawmakers tried to ban this RealPage from Colorado. They were unsuccessful. I think you claimed a victory in that one. What does it look like this year? Do you think you're gonna? What are your prospects?
Well, I think the political climate changes because of the Department of Justice investigation, because of the White House paper. It's not very scholarly, but it's certainly printed on White House stationery, and the Attorney General's investigation. None of them have proven any of those allegations, and frankly, my opinion is they're flat out wrong on their allegations. And I don't think they're going to have a lot of success in the litigation of it. But it's like an FBI investigation. When the investigation is out there, the average not completely plugged in listener is going to say, well, where there's smoke, there's got to be fire. The department.
My rent's too high. I get it.
Yeah, exactly. Their conclusions about the amount of financial impact are just ludicrous. They don't even really try to go through the math of saying why. They refer you to another paper and say, well, and I think what they're doing is multiplying the number of rental units in the area that they're talking about by the 4% that they're claiming rents have gone up because of it, by the 45% of the users that they claim are using it, and just coming up with a number. But that doesn't make it true. That just makes it a number to put on a piece of paper. They continue to miss the fact that this is a tremendous labor-saving and valuable way to get the most up-to-date information on what the market's doing. And that when a housing provider makes a mistake of pricing a unit too high, that unit's going to sit there for a while and house nobody.
Right.
And that's a very, very bad outcome when you're talking about a place without enough housing.
Interesting. Well,
rental property providers, and there's not a lot of people that are in commerce that are subject to this, but people that rent things have inventory that deteriorates, that just plain goes away. If you are trying to put an apartment out for rent and you price it too high and it sits there for a day and nobody rents it, well, that's a day of rent you will never get back. There's nothing you can do to recover that loss. If it sits there a month, that's true for a month's worth of rent. So getting the place back, turning it fast, getting somebody else to rent it and get it moved in is the key to profitability in our game. And so anybody that chases that is maximizing their profit. The reason that doesn't apply to a normal transaction, just, imagine you own the Foot Locker down at the mall and you price your Nikes too high. Well, you figure that out in, say, day 2, and you lower your price to what somebody's willing to pay for them. Well, you didn't lose the shoes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You lost the time value of money of not selling the shoes 2 days sooner, but you didn't lose any portion of the shoes. And that's a very, very different transaction than what rental housing providers are involved in.
Drew Hamrick, thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, thanks for visiting. I appreciate it.
Maybe this is just me, but I've got a feeling that CityCast listeners are going to have some thoughts about this one, and I want to hear them. What do you think about rent-setting algorithms and junk fees? Do you have better advice or a secret trick to negotiate lower rent? Call in on the My Rent is Too Damn High hotline at 720-500-5418. Again, let us know the magic words to whisper in your landlord's ear at 720-500-5418. And hey, check the show notes for a link to a very cool new event we're planning. You're invited to Heyday, an indoor fair with urban flair, March 8th. It's going to be a blast. Get your ticket now. That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed the show, why not take a minute to tell RealPage CEO Dana Jones about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to our morning newsletter, Hey Denver, and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See you then.